It was Christmas Eve when my mother's voice sliced through the doorway. "Don't come back here ever again." Her words hit harder than the icy wind behind me. The porch light flickered, casting her shadow across the snow like a warning. My father stood silent, arms crossed, eyes cold. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. The snow soaked through my boots as I stepped off that porch, every flake whispering that something inside me had just frozen for good. That night, I walked away, and 5 years later, they wished they hadn't said it. I grew up in Seattle in a house where appearances mattered more than warmth. My mother, Marlene, believed that reputation was a kind of religion. Every morning, she'd glide through the kitchen in heels, lipstick perfect, reminding me that a Moore woman should always be presentable. My father, Thomas, said little, but followed her rules like scripture. He measured respect in obedience and silence. And then there was Cassandra, my older sister, the kind of daughter they built their world around. Perfect GPA, perfect fiancé, perfect smile. At Sunday brunches, our relatives would gather around the dining table like spectators at a performance. Mom would pour coffee, laugh loudly, and say, "Cass just got promoted again. Partner track already." Everyone clapped. Then she'd turn to me. "Lavana's still finding her path," she'd add, smiling thinly as if it were an act of mercy. I'd feel my face flush, pretending to sip from an empty cup. Back then, I tried so hard to be the peacekeeper. I'd help set the table, run errands, stay quiet when Cassandra interrupted me mid-sentence. I thought maybe if I gave more, they'd love me more. But love in that house had conditions, degrees, titles, and the right kind of company. I was 20 when I met Dylan Reese. It was late spring, the air still cold from Seattle rain. I'd stopped by a corner auto shop because my old Honda refused to start again. Dylan came out wiping his hands on a rag, his hair messy, smile easy. "Battery's dead," he said, tapping the hood, "but I can fix her up." He didn't talk down to me, he didn't judge. When he asked if I wanted coffee afterward, I said yes without thinking. We sat in his pickup truck outside a small diner, steam fogging the windows. He told me about growing up without much but working hard for everything. I told him about my family, how nothing I did ever seemed enough. He just nodded and said, "Maybe they're looking at the wrong things." That night, for the first time in years, I laughed freely. Weeks turned into months. I started visiting the garage after work, bringing sandwiches, learning to change tires just to stay longer. Dylan's world was loud, messy, and real, nothing like the polished quiet of my parents' home. I liked it. I liked him. But I also knew what my parents would think. When I finally told Mom, she stared at me like I'd confessed a crime. "A mechanic, Lavana, really?" Her voice dripped with disbelief. "You went to college. You could be with someone who wears a suit, not grease." Dad didn't say much. He just folded his newspaper tighter. Cassandra tried to smooth it over with her usual calm tone. "They just want what's best for you," she whispered later, but her eyes said she agreed with them. From then on, every dinner became an interrogation. "Does he even have health insurance?" Mom would ask between bites. "What's his plan for the future?" Dad added. I wanted to shout that Dylan was kind, that he worked harder than anyone I knew, but I didn't. I kept eating, kept shrinking. The tension built slowly, like rain filling a gutter until it overflows. I started staying out later, using overtime as an excuse. Mom began calling at night, leaving voicemails laced with guilt. "You're breaking your father's heart." But when I'd finally come home, the house would be silent, lights off, except for the faint glow from their bedroom window. Sometimes I'd stand at the foot of the stairs, listening to them talk about me like I wasn't there. "She's drifting," Mom would sigh. "That boy will ruin her." Dad would grunt, and I'd hear the clink of his glass on the nightstand. I'd go to my room, stare at the ceiling, and wonder if they'd ever see me beyond their disappointment. That winter, Seattle felt colder than usual, and not just because of the weather. I could sense something breaking in our family, the kind of crack that doesn't heal once it's there. I just didn't know the night it would finally shatter was closer than I thought. Every family dinner became a stage play, where Cassandra shone under the spotlight, and I was the forgotten understudy. Mom would beam at her across the table. "Cass, tell them about the new case you're handling," she'd say, ignoring the fact that I'd just mentioned getting a commendation at work. Cassandra would smile politely, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and launch into details about her client meetings downtown. Dad nodded along, pride softening his face. Then he'd glance at me. "You should take notes, Lavana. That's what ambition looks like." It wasn't the words that hurt the most, it was how natural they sounded coming from him. I tried to keep my distance, but family has a way of dragging you back into the fire. Mom would still invite me over, saying she missed me, but every visit felt like walking into a courtroom. The walls carried judgment. Even the family photos seemed to glare. Once, when I arrived wearing jeans after a long day at the shop, Mom frowned. "You used to dress so nicely," she said. "What happened?" Cassandra's fiancé, a surgeon named Richard, chuckled softly, pretending not to hear. They all thought Dylan was a phase, some misguided rebellion that would fade once I came to my senses. But Dylan made me feel alive in ways that House never could. He didn't care about pedigrees or bank accounts. We'd drive out to the Sound after dark park by the water and talk about opening his own garage one day. He believed in small steps and honest work. You don't need their approval, he told me once. You just need to breathe. But the more time I spent with him, the harsher the contrast became. Cassandra's engagement party sealed it. The ballroom was dripping in white roses and chandeliers, her picture-perfect life on display. Mom cornered me near the dessert table, her voice sharp under the music. "You should think about your future," she said. "Your sister is marrying stability. You're playing house with a man who changes tires." The words cut deep. I excused myself, stepping outside for air. Rain mixed with tears I refused to acknowledge. Dylan followed, placing his jacket over my shoulders. "Let it go," he whispered. But how could I? I could feel my mother's gaze through the glass doors, cold and certain. After that night, I stopped trying to fix what was broken. Calls from home went unanswered. I poured my energy into helping Dylan's dream, drawing up spreadsheets, saving every spare dollar. For a while, it felt like we were building something real, something that could prove them wrong. Then the comments started slipping through Cassandra's polite smile. I heard Dylan still renting. "Isn't he a bit stuck?" She didn't mean to be cruel, but the pity in her tone said everything. I realized then that in my family's eyes, success was a costume you wore, not a life you built. By the time Christmas approached, I barely recognized myself in their stories. To them, I'd become the cautionary tale, the one who traded her future for love. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. Every word, every look, every silence, they stacked up brick by brick until the night the whole structure came crashing down. It happened on Christmas Eve. The air outside was sharp enough to sting, and inside the house glowed with the same perfection it always had. Garland wrapped tight around the staircase, crystal dishes gleaming on the table. I hadn't planned to come, but Cassandra begged me. "Just dinner," she said. "Mom's calmer now." I believed her. Dylan dropped me off at the curb, kissed my forehead, and promised to wait in the car. I stepped inside, brushing snow from my coat. Mom barely looked up from arranging the silverware. "You're late," she said, her voice cool. Dad stood by the fire drink in hand, eyes fixed on the news. Cassandra gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dinner was quiet at first. Roast turkey, cranberry sauce, and tension so thick you could carve it. Mom finally broke the silence. So she began still with the mechanic. I nodded. She set down her fork with a soft clang. "Lavana, you're wasting your life." I tried to stay calm. "He's starting his own business. We're doing fine." Mom laughed short and sharp. "Fine. Is that what you want for yourself?" Fine, Dad added without looking at me. "You could have been like your sister." I stared at my plate, the mashed potatoes blurring as my throat tightened. Cassandra murmured, "Mom, maybe we should." But Mom cut her off. "No, she needs to hear this. You're embarrassing this family, Lavana, living with that man, letting people talk." Something in me snapped. "At least he's honest," I said quietly. "He never pretends to love me for show." The room froze. Mom's face went pale, then hard. She stood up slowly, her napkin falling to the floor. "If you walk out with him tonight," she said, voice shaking with fury, "don't come back here ever again." The fire crackled behind her. Snow drifted past the window. Dad didn't say a word. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. "You mean that I asked?" She didn't blink. "I do." I looked at Cassandra, hoping for something, a word, a hand, anything, but she just lowered her eyes. I grab my bag from the hall, my fingers trembling. Then I guess this is goodbye. When I opened the door, the cold hit like a slap. I stood there shivering as the snow fell, each flake melting on my skin and disappearing before it reached the ground. Behind me, the door shut with a click that sounded like a lifetime ending. That night, I walked away. The first few weeks after that night blurred together: gray mornings, cheap motel rooms, the smell of damp carpet, and coffee gone cold. I remember sitting on the bed, clutching my phone, debating whether to call home. I dialed once. My mother answered, her tone clipped distant. "You made your choice," she said, and hung up before I could respond. That was the last time I heard her voice for years. I slept in my car for a while after Dylan's apartment lease ran out. He'd promised we'd find a new place together, but plans changed. One night, I caught a woman's laugh coming from his workshop, followed by a door slamming. When I confronted him, he sighed, not even angry, just tired. "Levana." "I didn't ask you to follow me." It was all I needed to hear. I packed my things into a duffel bag and walked out into the rain. That winter was the coldest I've ever known. Seattle rain never really stops. It just shifts between drizzle and storm. But that month, it felt personal. I wandered the streets until I found a small bus depot still open. A driver named Greg noticed me shaking and asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. He drove me to a cheap inn on the edge of town, paid for a night out of his own pocket, and said, "Get some rest. You'll figure it out." I didn't sleep much, but his kindness stayed with me. The next morning, I called Wendy, my best friend from high school. We hadn't talked in months, but she answered on the second ring. "Levana," she said, her voice warm. I told her everything, how my parents threw me out, how Dylan betrayed me, how I had nothing left. She didn't hesitate. "Come here," she said. "We'll figure it out." Wendy's apartment was small, one bedroom, a couch, and a cat that hissed at me for the first week, but it was safe. She handed me a mug of instant coffee and $200 from her tip jar. "It's not much," she said, "but you're starting over." And I did. I took a job at a convenience store, working double shifts, saving every cent I could. The customers barely looked at me, but I didn't care. I needed structure, something to anchor me. I started walking to work every morning before sunrise, watching the city wake up, the neon signs flickering off the smell of wet asphalt, the sound of the first buses rolling by. Slowly, I began to feel human again. One night, after counting the till, I found a flyer pinned to the bulletin board: evening accounting courses, community college open enrollment. I tore it down and took it home. Numbers had always made sense to me. They didn't lie, didn't twist meanings. They added up or they didn't. I signed up the next day. Balancing classes and work was brutal. I'd leave the store at midnight, catch the last bus, and collapse on Wendy's couch with my textbooks open. But every exam I passed, every small victory, built a new version of me, one who didn't need permission to exist. 2 years later, I finished the program and landed a junior accountant position at a financial firm downtown. The first time I saw my name on the office door, Levana Moore Accounting Department, I cried quietly in the stairwell so no one would see. That's where I met Raymond Cole. He was a history teacher who came into the office to set up a retirement plan. He had this calm energy, the kind that made the room quieter without trying. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, and for once I didn't hesitate out of fear. With him, I didn't feel like I had to explain who I used to be. 5 years after walking out into that snow, my life didn't look like redemption. It looked like peace. I had an apartment filled with my own furniture, a job that paid the bills, a circle of people who saw me not the shadow of my family's expectations. I learned that revenge didn't always mean payback. Sometimes it just meant living well enough that the people who doubted you have to face what they lost. When my company got invited to a major charity gala hosted by the Moore family, I said yes without hesitation. My boss, Laura Chen, smiled when she handed me the file. "You'll be our representative," she said. They requested someone from accounting to deliver the donation. I didn't tell her who the hosts were. The gala was held at the downtown Hyatt, one of those places my mother used to describe as respectable. I arrived early, walking beneath chandeliers so bright they made the marble shine like ice. I wore a long black dress, simple but sharp, the kind that said I didn't need to prove anything. Laura Chen waved from across the room, her red lipstick catching the light. "Lavana, this is your moment," she said, handing me the donation folder. "You'll present the check after dinner." I smiled steady, though my pulse thudded beneath my ribs. I'd practiced this calm for 5 years. Outside, rain streaked against the windows, blurring the city lights. Inside, the hum of conversation was almost orchestral, crystal glasses clinking forks against porcelain, polite laughter. Every sound pulled me back to that night, the table, the accusations, the silence before the storm. When I heard the MC's voice announce tonight's event is hosted by the Moore Family Foundation, I froze for half a second. My surname echoed through the hall, heavier than I remembered. And then I saw them. My mother Marlene stood near the stage, draped in navy silk, every hair pinned into perfection. My father lingered beside her, older, slower, but still carrying that same air of restrained pride. Cassandra was there too, now visibly pregnant, her husband guiding her through the crowd. For a moment, none of them noticed me. It was like watching actors in a play I'd already outgrown. I turned to the bar, ordered sparkling water, and waited. It didn't take long. Mom's gaze swept the room and landed on me. Her eyes widened confusion, flickering into recognition. She whispered something to Cassandra, who followed her stare. Dad turned last, his expression unreadable. They didn't approach. Not yet. Dinner began. Waiters moved like clockwork, serving roasted salmon and lemon risotto. I barely touched mine. My name appeared on the printed program beside the line Corporate Donation, presented by Lavana Moore, CPA, Northbridge Financial. I watched my mother's hand tremble slightly as she read it. When the MC called me to the stage, I stood slowly, every step deliberate. My heels clicked against the polished floor, the same rhythm as that night's footsteps on snow. The hall quieted. I took the microphone, smiled at the crowd, then looked directly at my parents. "Good evening." I began, my voice steady, echoing softly through the speakers. "It's an honor to represent Northbridge Financial tonight. We're proud to support the Moore Family Foundation's work with youth housing because no one deserves to be turned away from home." A murmur rippled through the audience. My mother's face froze. I continued holding the oversized check. "This donation comes from people who believe that everyone deserves a second chance. Sometimes when doors close, life opens another one." I learned that the hard way. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The silence said everything. For a long beat, no one moved. Then the MC cleared his throat, thanked me, and led the applause. Dozens of strangers clapped, unaware of the history crackling like electricity across the stage. I handed the check to Laura and stepped down. My mother reached me before I reached the exit. "Lavana," she said, her voice low, taut. "You could have warned us." I met her eyes. "You warned me first," I said. "Remember." Her jaw tightened. "That night we were scared. We didn't mean—" "Don't," I interrupted. "You meant it, and maybe you needed to. Because if you hadn't, I'd still be the daughter trying to earn her seat at this table." Cassandra hovered behind her, one hand on her stomach, tears shining in her eyes. "Lavana," she whispered, "they've changed. Mom, she regrets everything." I nodded once, maybe, but I'm not here for that. I'm here because I built something they said I never could. My father finally spoke. "We're proud of you," he said quietly, as if pride could erase years of silence. "Pride," I repeated, tasting the word. "That used to mean everything to you. Now it means nothing to me." For a moment, none of us moved. Around us, people laughed. Music swelled, champagne glasses clinked. I almost felt detached watching someone else's family disintegrate under the soft glow of chandeliers. Raymond appeared beside me, his hand warm against my back. "You okay?" he asked softly. I turned to him and smiled. "Yeah, better than okay." He nodded toward the exit. "Then let's go." As we walked out, I heard my mother calling my name again, softer this time, almost pleading. I didn't turn around. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. The city glimmered beneath it, reflections rippling in puddles. I inhaled deeply, the air cool and clean. Raymond opened the car door, but I paused, glancing back at the hotel's glass facade. Through it, I could see my parents standing together under the ballroom light, their figures small against the golden backdrop. I remembered the porch light from that night, the snow falling, the sound of the door closing. The same ache tried to rise in my chest, but it couldn't touch me anymore. I had outgrown it. Raymond followed my gaze. "That them?" he asked. I nodded. Yeah, that's them. He waited. You want to talk to them? No. I smiled faintly. They'll talk to themselves. Regret's loud enough. He reached for my hand. You sure? I'm sure. I said and meant it. We drove through the quiet streets of Seattle, headlights catching the rain like silver threads. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to look back. The city didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like proof that I'd survived, rebuilt, and risen without anyone's permission. Somewhere behind me, in that glittering ballroom, my parents were probably telling someone that I'd made it, twisting the story to sound like they'd always believed I would. That was fine. They could have their version. I had the truth. As the car turned onto my street, the neon sign from the corner cafe flickered, open 24 hours. I smiled. 5 years ago, I'd stared through that same window, broke and freezing, wondering if I'd ever feel safe again. Now I was driving home. The rain tapped gently against the windshield. Seattle never stopped raining, but tonight it felt different. It didn't sting anymore. It just washed things clean. When we reached my apartment, the rain had softened to a hush. Streetlights shimmered across the wet pavement, and I could see my reflection in the glass, steady, unafraid. Raymond walked me upstairs, his hand brushing mine. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and lavender. I slipped off my heels and stood by the window, watching the city breathe below. 5 years ago, I'd stood outside my parents' house, shivering, begging the universe for mercy. Tonight I stood taller because I'd learned something they never did. Love, built on control, isn't love at all. Raymond came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Still thinking about them, he asked. I smiled. Not really, just closing the chapter. Outside, the rain glowed beneath the streetlights, soft, endless, forgiving. Seattle still rains, I said quietly, but I'm not cold anymore. Have you ever had to walk away to find peace? Share your story below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories like mine.